More!
Okay then. If Midnight had known when she woke up that next morning that her training to be a real wolf would take her almost an entire year round, she might have slapped something. But, to her surprise, it took just that. At the beginning, in the first day or two, Silver Starling gave task after task to see how well Midnight could perform them. In skills like stealth, Midnight was exceptionally well. But in most of the other fields like hunting, tracking, fighting, and even claw sharpening, Midnight failed. Silver, seeing as how she would need extra time with Midnight, focused on one task at a time, starting with the basic territory patrolling. Though Midnight tried her best, she had many struggles in training. Everything from her stances, how she bit, even how she communicated with her barks and tail. But through every problem, Midnight worked hard to overcome it. She watched and studied and practiced hard to keep up with training, and excelled soon in each field of the beginning lessons. Soon, Midnight would meet and talk with other mythics in the wood, creatures who were very unlike the everyday rabbit and deer, and saw secret Silver had in getting around the woods and passages to help her duck and cover from others. And after each lesson and day of training, the pair would head home to see, if they hadn't met them throughout the day, Powder and Bandit, who would share meals before more lessons were to be had. Though Midnight admitted these lessons were more like stories, if anything, Silver Starling would, with Powder and Bandit, sing and tell stories of creatures they had seen. Kurins, krakens, Arizotl, feathered dragons, etc. All manners of creatures, some good, some bad, and many dangerous. But many still amazing tales to tell. Finally, as the stars would shine and the moon would rise, singing and dancing would happen every so often, or just simply stargazing would happen before bed. But lessons weren't all that the group would do. Starling and Powder both had tasks they did each day. Powder's was mostly sneaking near ponies and feasting on love as close as she could get, if not taking love here and there from some of the animals in the forest. But she also had Midnight help her with things like cleaning the dens, bringing straw from the edge of the wild fields in the Everfree, and gathering the extra supplies for Silver Starling when she would forget. Silver Starling's chores on the other paw were very different. Some were easy to understand, hunting for food of all sorts, gathering water and supplies, repainting the drawings in her home. But some of these things made not too much sense until she learned more about Silver Starling. One of those examples were the fact that, deep in the heart of Starling's territory, Silver Starling had orphaned baby animals to care for. The first time Starling showed them to Midnight, the purple wolf was shocked. Within the good-sized territory held 30 to 40 baby animals in need of homes, or at least families to take them in. Every day before training, Starling would wake up before the crack of dawn to feed them all, and do her other chores on top of that. For the first little, Midnight thought nothing of it, especially in their early weeks of training. But as weeks passed and lessons grew longer and longer, the purple wolf began to wonder. Where had Silver come from? Where were the scars on her leg from? Why, when they hunted, did she never go after the young? Why did she take care of so many young when it tired her out greatly? All these questions and more Midnight wanted to ask, but every time she tried, she was shot down. Whether it was from the winged wolf telling her to get back to work, giving her solo training, or even just telling her to drop it. Midnight constantly failed to get any answers from the winged wolf about her past. Eventually, she even tried at one point to talk more with Powder, only for the changeling to repeat, as she always did, "You need to find out for yourself." And in time, Midnight did just that. Well, sort of. In her time with Starling, she gathered a few things here and there. She found that Silver Starling had bad writing, but could read and write in Dragonese, which is what her books were written in. She had travelled all over the world and seen many new lands far beyond Equestria, from all the items Midnight saw in the archive room. Even the fact that the medallion, when she had managed to see it flipped over during one of Silver's naps, had been made by someone named E. But the biggest clue Midnight had gathered on Starling was she had been through a lot from the nightmare she would sometimes see her have. In these times, Midnight would hear her mumble with only a few words, like Mom, Dad, and Topaz, as well as tears always being on her face during these night terrors. And while she in time did learn to let go of the curiosity of Silver, Starling's past, Midnight over the months still had no idea why the Goliath took her on with all the work she had. Midnight even remembered one almost a month after they started. Midnight had been pacing in her room for 2 reasons. First was that she was confident today would be the day she would find out the answer she sought. And the second reason was walking back and forth helped her cool her burnt tail down. Who knew 3 little dragons could have such good aim when playing tag? As Midnight made her way into the library, she saw Silver Starling reading one of her books, beside a giant pile of books. Midnight, figuring to giving her a little payback for having her help the 3 little dragons learn about hunting, started to sneak up on Starling around the pile of books. Just as she was behind Starling and pouncing to land on her back, Silver Starling raised her tail and swatted her to the side into another small pile of books. "Nice try, pup. Gotta do a lot better than that if you want to sneak up on me," Silver said, never looking away from her book. Midnight, sitting up straight now, asked in a curious tone, "But Powder always sneaks up on you when you're sleeping or training me. How come she can do it?" "Because she has had more training and knows when to get me, pup," Silver said as she turned the page. Midnight groaned as she walked over to Starling sitting beside her. "When are you going to stop calling me a puppy?" Midnight asked in an annoyed tone. "Perhaps I will consider it when you stop acting like one," Silver chuckled as she finally looked up from her reading to Midnight. "Well, I think I'm just going to call you a bore, since you're boring," Midnight chuckled as Starling rolled her eyes and gave the purple wolf a raised eyebrow. "Did you just come to practice your banter skills, or do you actually need something?" the winged wolf asked, closing her book to give her full attention to the purple wolf student. "Oh, well, Midnight said hesitantly. "You know how you do all this work throughout the day?" "Yeah," Starling responded, her face plastered with a look of confusion. "And you know, on top of all the animals you take care of, and chores you do, you still spend time training me? Right?" Midnight said, her own face now morphing into one of embarrassment and curiosity. "Yeah?" Starling responded once again, with the same look and sound of confusion. Well, I just wanted to know," Midnight said, swishing her tail, flicking her ears back nervously. "Why did you take me on as a student? Why take on more work when you could have just sent me away?" Silver Starling gave a blank, surprised look on her face before responding in a confused tone. "Just helping a fellow wolf and mythic out." Seeming satisfied with the answer she gave, Starling cracked open her book again and began to read. Midnight, on the other paw, was not satisfied. Helping a fellow mythic and wolf out? It had to be a lie. Midnight stomped her way over to get right in between the book Starling was reading and the winged wolf's snout, glaring like Starling had taught her when she wanted to intimidate some beast. Starling, who was a little taken aback by the sudden move, moved her head back slightly and had a look of confusion and annoyance. "What? I told you I'm just helping." "Right. And I'm Princess Celestia painted purple," Midnight said. "Look, Starling, I've been here long enough to know when you're trying to keep something from me. And if you're not willing to be honest about your past, at least tell me why you took me on, okay? Please?" Starling sighed as she seemed to accept she was never going to get to her reading, until she appeased the purple ball of fury. The purple ball of fury. All right, you want the truth? Fine then, Starling said as she moved her paws to close the book again and pushed Midnight a bit back for some space. The truth is, I took you on because me and you are not so different in a few aspects. Midnight's look of confusion melted away to a look of surprise as she still stared at Starling. I won't say much, just that I know what it's like to be alone and how important a teacher can be, which is why I took you on as I did, Starling said somberly as she flicked her ears back and closed her eyes. The answer was still vague and not exactly what she was looking for. But it was an answer. As Midnight looked at Silver, she knew she needed a hug. But with Silver being so much bigger than she was, Midnight knew that was not going to happen. So, she went for the next best thing. She walked forward and gave Silver a nuzzle at her chest. Silver seemed surprised at first, but then moved her wings forward and almost mimicked a hug to the smaller wolf. After that, Midnight decided to respect Silver Starling's privacy and not ask any more questions like that. Instead, the two grew closer as a family and continued to keep up with their work and lessons, even growing to the point of Midnight starting to help Starling with some of her chores. As the seasons changed, so did their lessons, each one seeming to sink in with the elements around them. In summer, hunting and tracking herds and flocks became star. In fall, gathering remaining plants and storing away food became essential. With winter came many survival lessons, like getting water from snow, finding hibernating animals, respecting the other animals' territories around them, severe tracking, patrolling, and claw sharpening, as well as basic fighting to defend against the animals in the surrounding wood. And finally, when the thaw came and spring finally returned to the land, came hygiene methods and more advanced fighting. Soon summer was back again, and with 1 year almost upon them, Starling soon focused her lessons on a few specialised skills, like teaching her about improving den qualities, to optimise heat and comfort, finding clean water, which Midnight was grateful to learn so she could avoid getting sick as she used to, even which plants she needed to chew on every now and then for added nutrition, and to help cure illnesses. But in time, Starling told Midnight only one lesson was left to learn: howling. So, on the night of the supermoon, the moon Starling had told Midnight was the brightest in all the season, both of them sat on the ledge of the cave and prepared to howl. Powder and Bandit had long since gone to bed, mostly due to the fact that Powder had wanted to give the two some privacy. But the pair sat with the moon finally rising above the horizon and bathing the land in its bright glow. Okay now, Starling said warmly. This is one of your most important lessons. Can you tell me why? Midnight thought hard before asking. Because it's a stereotype that wolves sing to the moon and we're keeping up the tradition? Starling laughed, but then gave the playful wolf a nudge with her paw. No. Starling chuckled as she settled down, keeping her head lowered to talk better with Wolf. No, howling is more than just a tradition. Yes, some of us may howl to the moon for fun, but we wolves and winged wolves howl to communicate. Communicate? Midnight asked in surprise. You mean the howls mean something? Silver Starling nodded with a smile as she raised her head to look at the moon. Yep. Every howl means something different, you see. Every tone and way of doing it. Only reason we howl when the moon is out is because it's quieter at night. Midnight looked nervous as she thought about messing up and sending the wrong message out, but Silver gave her a smile and cocked her head to the side as a sign of, say, watch. When Midnight was watching her, Silver took a deep breath and let out 3 short barks, followed by a long howl. After a minute of howling, Starling turned back to Midnight with a smile. Midnight was amazed when she heard the howl echo from miles and miles out, while in response other calls sounded. in the same fashion from all over the forest. That was a respectful way to say hello. It's one of the first things you learn, much like how one long howl means come here and two short barks means help. So if you wanted to say help, come here, you should combine them. And over time you get good enough to do this. Standing up this time, Starling let out a group of barks, yips and howls, which was responded many times over by many animals. Midnight, curious as always, looked up expectantly at Silver, hoping for a translation. Silver smiled at her and chuckled. I just told him what was going on and introduced you. Midnight was surprised still, to say the least. All that and a few barks? Starling then nodded to Midnight with a smile and looked at her expectantly. Okay now, just take a deep breath and let your instincts take control, okay? Midnight scrunched up her face in confusion as she looked back at the big winged wolf and flicked her ears back. I was born with pony instincts, remember? Midnight said hesitantly. Midnight saw the big winged wolf's eyes furrow slightly at the mention of the word pony. Midnight knew that even in almost a year they had been student and teacher, the purple wolf still noticed that the word seemed to upset the winged Goliath. She still had not figured out why, but Silver Starling seemed almost tartarus bent on avoiding ponies and anything related to them, like the plague. Midnight saw Starling turn her head with a great sigh before looking out into the forest and waiting for Midnight to try. Not wanting to anger the winged wolf, Midnight took a deep breath to calm herself, and then tried to mimic what she had recently heard. To say the least, Midnight knew she failed. For one thing, she let out 6 howl barks instead of 3, and for another, she went at the howl way too strong and squeaked a bit. If none of that was a dead giveaway, though, the corner of her eye, Midnight saw Starling flinch when the howling got pitchy and gave her a little bit of a straight stare when the purple wolf finished. Gulping in fear, Midnight looked at Silver with her ears back and tail curled in a tuck. Did I do something wrong? Midnight asked nervously. Starling chuckled and looked down at her. Well, you kinda just sent a lot of swear words out to the mythic community in the forest. What? Midnight practically squeaked, and both Starling and her heard a lot of calls that sounded angered back at both of them. Midnight, fearful of the consequences, shrank back in fear. She noticed that Starling saw her, and to Midnight's surprise seemed worried about the wolf. Suddenly, a look of anger was on her face as Starling let out a few growls towards the forest, taking a deep breath as she went, before letting out what sounded identical to a loud roar of a dragon. Midnight had to slap her paws over her ears with how loud it got, and within a minute and a half, the roaring ended and the forest grew silent. Silver Starling stared at the forest, panting, as Midnight walked back up beside Starling and looked confused. What did you just do? Starling, after coughing for a bit, responded in a raspy voice. I just told him to give you a break and to leave you be, she said, as she started to walk back into the cave where Midnight actually saw Powder, who had some of the weirdest bedhead imaginable. You keep going, Midnight. I need to rest my throat. Silver started before stopping and calling out, Oh, I almost forgot. There's one last lesson. I got mixed up, so you got one more before you're good to go. One more? But you said... was all Midnight could call out before Starling walked into the cave, talking with a freaked-out looking Powder. Midnight sat there for a while, thinking about what she'd learned. New lesson? Mistake? Starling's always thorough with this stuff. What could have made her mess up? And why didn't she explain the lesson like she always does? Midnight thought as she took some deep breaths and began practicing quietly with everything she'd learned, since she didn't want to cause another issue without Starling there to help her. When she did finally go back inside and curled up to sleep, her mind began to swim with worry about what was to come with the risen sun.